At the Christmas party, while everyone was happily exchanging gifts, my father secretly sold my house to pay off my irresponsible sister's debts. When I stepped into the living room, they stood by the Christmas tree, sneering. "Now you've lost your house," my sister said, raising her glass. My father, standing next to her, flashed a grin as if he had been waiting for this moment. I stood frozen at the door, my winter boots still covered in snow, the weight of my sea bag heavy on the floor behind me. The laughter in the room died out as everyone turned to look at me. For a moment, it felt like the world was holding its breath. I didn't let the anger show, not yet. I just smiled slow and steady. "What's so funny?" They snapped. I met their eyes one by one. "The house you sold is actually still mine." The silence that followed was suffocating. My voice had cut through the cheerful music and chatter like a knife. I could see the confusion and panic spread across my father's face, but I didn't let it affect me. Not anymore. I had trusted them. I had spent years putting family first, sacrificing everything for their sake. And this was how they repaid me. By taking the one thing I had left to call my own, the place I had worked my ass off to buy with my own blood and sweat. They thought they'd won, but I was done. I stepped further into the room, my pulse steady, my heart cold. I wasn't there for their games anymore. They had made their choice. Now, it was time for me to make mine. I had spent years trusting my family, believing that no matter what happened, blood was thicker than water. My father, Seth, had always promised that we'd look out for each other. But what was this, if not the ultimate betrayal? I remember the first time I put my heart and soul into buying that house. It wasn't much, just a small 3-bedroom on Lakeshore Drive, but it was mine. I had worked my ass off for that place, using every penny I saved from years of service in the Coast Guard. Every time I left on a mission, it felt like I was holding onto a piece of stability, a piece of the life I was fighting for. I still remembered when I signed the papers, how proud I was to finally own something, to have something permanent, something I could call home. The house was my anchor, the one constant when everything else in life felt uncertain. I never expected my family to turn it into a pawn in their game. Growing up, I was the responsible one, always steady, always doing the right thing. Ivy, my younger sister, was the opposite. She had a way of charming everyone around her with her smile and her influencer persona. But behind all the glitz, she had a knack for getting into trouble. She never quite learned how to handle money, always running up bills, buying clothes and shoes she didn't need, or getting into the latest fad with no thought of consequences. Dad always excused it, saying she was just figuring things out. I believed him, back then, but over the past few years Ivy's behavior started catching up with her. I could see the signs, the overdraft notices, the increasing pile of credit card bills. I wanted to step in to help her, but every time I offered, she'd brush me off. "You wouldn't understand, Margaret. You're always so serious. It's just stuff. I'll figure it out." And Dad, he'd always back her up, saying she needed a little help to get her life on track. That's when I started noticing things about Dad that made me uneasy. He'd ask me for small amounts of money, sometimes to help with utilities, sometimes for Ivy's business ventures. It was always vague, never clear what it was for, but I trusted him. I figured, it's family, it's what you do. The first warning sign came when I was deployed to Kodiak. I had just come off a grueling rescue mission, pulling people out of 50-foot waves, adrenaline pumping through me for hours, only to return to an empty barracks with my mind racing. I was FaceTiming with Dad, trying to stay connected with the family while I was far away. Ivy was there too, showing off a new handbag she had gotten, all smiles, her voice squealing like it always did when she unboxed something new. Dad just sat there, sipping his coffee, nodding. "She's really trying to grow her channel, haven't," he said, as if that was supposed to explain the $1,000 purse. "These girls need to invest in their image, you wouldn't understand." I didn't argue. I just stared at the screen, the unease in my gut growing, but I kept quiet. I didn't want to make waves. I didn't want to be the nagging older sister. I just wanted to believe everything was fine. But something about that conversation stuck with me. I should have known better than to ignore it. When I got home, there was always something new, another purchase, another bill paid off, another empty promise to figure it out later. All the while, I was still making sacrifices, putting in long hours at work, sending money back when I could, hoping to support them in their struggles. And all the while, They were quietly chipping away at the life I had built for myself. It wasn't until I checked Zillow one day, out of pure curiosity, that I saw it, my house, listed for sale. The price was higher than what I had bought it for, but the listing details were clear it was mine. Or, at least, it should have been. The agent's photo was familiar: Chase Manning, Dad's old bowling buddy who had gotten into real estate years ago. I froze. My heart raced as I called Dad, over and over, but he didn't pick up. I sent a text to Ivy, no response. That night, I stayed up, scrolling through every conversation, every transfer I had made, every check I'd written. It all came back to me, how every little bit had gone to them, how I'd trusted them, how they had manipulated me, all while I was out there saving lives. It was hard to believe that the people I had loved most, the ones who had always claimed to have my back, had quietly turned me into a source of income. And now, the house, the one thing that had kept me grounded, was gone. I could feel the pieces starting to fall into place, each one heavier than the last. And that was when I knew. I wasn't going to sit back and let this slide. I wasn't going to let them walk all over me anymore. It was time to take control. The shock of finding my house listed for sale still hadn't worn off when I started digging deeper. The uneasy feeling in my chest twisted tighter as I scrolled through the Zillow listing again. I stared at the photo of the house, the one I had worked so hard for, now just another piece of property to be sold off for someone else's gain. I didn't want to believe it. I couldn't. I had to know for sure. So, I started going through every document, every email, every transaction I could find. The first clue came when I looked at my bank statement. A transfer to an account I didn't recognize, no explanation. I called my bank, but they couldn't tell me anything without more details. I could feel my stomach tightening as I realized how deep this went. They had been hiding it from me. All of it. The emails from Dad were the next bombshell. There were several, mostly about family finances, with Ivy attached as a CC going back months. One email stood out, a request from Dad asking for help with utilities. But when I checked the date, it was right around the same time he'd asked me for help with Ivy's debts. He'd been lying to me about the reasons behind every request. That was when I found the signature. My father had signed a durable power of attorney for me, but I hadn't signed it myself. It didn't stop there. The deeper I dug, the more I found. A home equity line of credit opened in my Mahan, 40,000. The account was now drained, and the funds, it seemed, were gone. But the worst part wasn't the money. It was that the house, the one I had bought with my own hands, had been used as collateral for a loan that I hadn't authorized. And to top it off, it had been sold without my knowledge. I could feel my pulse quicken as I pieced everything together. It wasn't just a mistake. It was intentional. They had planned this. Dad had signed over my property, and Ivy, who had known what was happening, had stayed silent. All to pay for her mistakes. For her debts. The final blow came when I saw the name of the real estate agent, Chase Manning. Dad's old bowling buddy, who had been getting into real estate for years. I'd met him a few times, always with Ivy. I never liked him much. But now it was clear he'd been in on it too. The deal had been made quietly, under the table, while I was out at sea. While I was fighting to save others, they were quietly selling my future. I couldn't breathe. My head spun. How had it gone this far? How had I missed all the signs? I thought about the times I'd sent money, the extra transfers, and the countless excuses my father had given me. I had trusted him. I had believed in my family, in the idea that we were supposed to take care of each other. But they had sold me out. It wasn't just about the house. It wasn't even about the money. It was the betrayal, the lie that ran deeper than I could have imagined. The house was a symbol of everything I had worked for, and they had taken that away from me, without a second thought. I sat there for hours, staring at the screen. My phone rang a few times, texts from Dad, missed calls from Ivy, but I didn't pick up. I couldn't bring myself to speak to them. Not now. Not after everything they'd done. I needed to think, to process what had just happened, but more than that, I needed to act. I didn't know what I was going to do yet, but I knew one thing for sure: I wasn't going to let them get away with this. I spent the next few days in a haze, piecing together the chaos my family had made of my life. I knew I had to act fast. If I waited too long, they'd slip away, and I'd be left with nothing but the weight of their lies. But I couldn't do this alone. I needed help. And not just anyone, I needed someone who understood the legal mess I was about to get myself into. I reached out to Princess, an old friend from my time in the Coast Guard. She had gone Gigi after her first tour, and now she was a lawyer with a sharp mind and an even sharper sense of justice. I hadn't spoken to her in over 2 years, but I knew if anyone could help me navigate this, it was her. I sent her a text. Can you help me figure out if a PA can sell a service member's house without their knowledge? And what's the best way to handle this situation? She replied almost immediately, send me the address. I'll pull the records tomorrow. Within an hour, I had gathered every document I could find: emails from Dad asking for money, the signed power of attorney, the emails with Chase Manning, the listing photos. I didn't leave anything out. I needed every shred of evidence I could get my hands on. I couldn't afford to miss a thing. The next morning, Princess called me. Okay, Haven. Here's what you've got. The PA they signed for you isn't valid. You didn't authorize it. And the sale, they can't legally close the deal without your permission, especially with that lien in your name. They think they've pulled the wool over your eyes, but they haven't. I felt a small flicker of relief, but it was short-lived. The work ahead of me was going to be brutal. So what now? I asked. You've got to move fast. The longer you wait, the harder it's going to be. You've got to expose them. And you need to do it in a way they can't weasel their way out of. I'll help you get everything together, but you need to be prepared. They won't go down without a fight. That was the last thing I needed to hear. But it was also exactly what I needed. The next few days were a blur. I contacted a lawyer to help me file the paperwork, and I began working on a plan. I needed to confront my father, face to face, and expose what he had done. But more than that, I needed to show him that I wasn't going to let him get away with destroying everything I had worked for. I didn't know how this would end, but I was done being the one who always had to clean up the mess. It was time for my father to face the consequences of his actions. As I sat down in front of my laptop, preparing for the fight ahead, I knew there was no turning back. If I wanted to take control of my life again, I was going to have to burn every bridge I had left. But I was done being the pawn in their game. This was my life, and I wasn't going to let them ruin it any longer. I arrived at the house on Christmas Eve with a plan in my mind, but my heart was heavy. The snow was falling fast, swirling around my car as I made the final turn onto Lakeshore Drive. I could feel the familiar knot in my stomach tighten, but this time, it wasn't just nerves. It was a quiet rage building up, the kind that comes when you've been pushed too far and finally, decide you've had enough. I parked a few houses down, keeping the engine running for just a moment longer. The house loomed ahead, brighter than ever, with all the Christmas lights twinkling like nothing had ever changed. My family was in there, celebrating, as if everything was perfectly fine. As if they hadn't just betrayed me in the worst way possible. I grabbed the binder from the passenger seat, the one I had spent hours assembling in airport lounges, on flights, and in my hotel rooms. Every page, every screenshot, every email, every document was in there. It wasn't just about the house, it was about everything. The lies, the manipulation, the way they'd used my absence to line their pockets and destroy my trust. I didn't have time to waste anymore. I grabbed my sea bag, slung it over my shoulder, and stepped out into the snow. My boots crunched loudly on the icy ground as I made my way up the sidewalk. The porch light above me flickered in the cold wind, casting a weak glow over the front yard. The sound of laughter and music spilled out from the open door. They were waiting for me, no doubt thinking they had won. When I stepped inside, the first thing I saw was the tree. The 10-foot noble fir, drowning in lights and ornaments. It was almost comical. Really, the house was decorated as if it were still a home, not a place sold out from under me by the people I trusted most. My dad and Ivy stood by the tree, glasses of champagne in hand, grinning like they were the proudest people alive. "Look who finally showed up," Dad said, his voice a little too loud, a little too proud. He was wearing his usual holiday sweater, the one with Rudolph's red nose lighting up. It wasn't funny, but it was his way of making light of everything. Always trying to brush off the serious stuff with a joke. I stood there for a moment, just looking at them. Ivy was in her usual influencer uniform, a sequin mini dress and heels that probably cost more than my entire rent for the year. Her face was all smiles, eyes shining like she was in the middle of some big victory. I didn't say anything at first. I just took it all in, the fake cheer, the look on their faces, the way they acted like nothing had happened. But it had happened. And it was time they knew I wasn't going to let it slide. "No, you've lost your house," Ivy said, her voice sweet like she was giving me a gift. She raised her glass in a mock toast. I didn't flinch. I didn't even blink. I smiled, slow and controlled, and took a step toward them. The room fell silent. "What's so funny?" Dad snapped, clearly expecting me to crumble, to beg for forgiveness. I pulled my phone out, slow, like it was just another day, and opened the file Princess had helped me compile. I turned the screen toward them. "The house you sold is actually still mine," I said, keeping my voice calm. The room went dead silent. I could hear the music in the background, but it was as if the sound was muffled, like everything had stopped just for that moment. I could see the confusion on Ivy's face, the panic on Dad's. They had no idea I knew what they had done. I watched them both closely, waiting. It wasn't until Ivy tried to speak, her voice trembling, that I let myself feel anything other than rage. That's not possible," she said, trying to hold it together. "Dad signed a power of attorney for me," I said, each word precise. "He used my name to open a home equity line of credit, and he sold my house to pay off your debts." I let that sink in. There was a moment of stunned silence, followed by chaos. Dad's face went pale, his eyes darting from me to Ivy like he was looking for a way out. Ivy's hand shook as she clutched her champagne glass, her smile long gone. "What the hell, Haven?" Ivy finally blurted out, her voice cracking. "We were just helping you out, you don't get it." I stepped forward, letting my voice drop low so everyone could hear it clearly. "Helping me? By selling my house? By using my service to get what you wanted?" "No, You took everything I worked for, and you used me." Dad tried to intervene, his hand raised as if to silence me. "This is family, Haven. We were just family." I interrupted, stepping closer, no longer holding back. "Family doesn't sell each other out. Family doesn't take advantage of someone when they're not looking. And family damn sure doesn't think it's okay to rob someone, because they're away fighting for their country." The room was completely still now. Every eye was on me, and I could feel the weight of the moment pressing down. Ivy looked like she might cry, but there was no sympathy left in me for her. "Not after everything." "Don't you dare look at me like I'm the villain here," I said, my voice sharp. "You can't sell my house, and you can't hide from the truth anymore." I let the silence stretch for a beat, watching them both as they processed everything. Then I turned on my heel, walking toward the door. "You're not getting away with this," I said, over my shoulder. "Not now, not ever." I stepped out of the house, leaving them standing there in the same place they had been. The sounds of their Christmas party echoed behind me, but I wasn't listening anymore. I had made my stand, and it was time for them to face the consequences. The next few days felt like a blur. My hands were shaking as I called the lawyer. I didn't know what I was doing yet, but I knew one thing for sure: I was going to make them pay for what they'd done. I wasn't going to let my family ruin everything I'd worked for. Not this time. I was done being the one who picked up the pieces. I sat down at my laptop, gathering everything I had, the emails, the screenshots, the paperwork that Princess had helped me pull. It was time to make this real. I needed a lawyer, someone who could help me navigate this mess. I couldn't do this alone. The documents I had weren't enough. I needed to make sure that what I had was ironclad, so they couldn't weasel out of it. The lawyer I found, an older woman with a no-nonsense attitude, was everything I needed. She looked through my documents, gave me the kind of look that made me feel like I was finally being heard. "This is a case of fraud, plain and simple. You were lied to, used, and taken advantage of. Your father signed documents without your knowledge, and your house was sold without your consent. I'm going to make sure they don't get away with this." I felt a small sense of relief, but it didn't last long. There was a lot to do. The lawyer sent me instructions to gather more paperwork, more proof that my father had manipulated me, more evidence of Ivy's involvement, more from Chase Manning, the real estate agent who had helped them sell the house. It was tedious, draining work, but as I spent the days sorting through every email, every text message, every transaction, I could feel my resolve harden. I wasn't just fighting for my house anymore, I was fighting for myself. For the first time in years, I was standing up for what was mine. And then there was the confrontation. It was coming. I couldn't back out now. I had no choice but to face them, to make them see that their actions had consequences. It wasn't just about the house. It was about everything they'd stolen from me, the trust, the love, the belief that family should protect each other. They had taken that away from me, and now it was my turn to take it back. The night before I was set to confront my father and sister, I sat at the kitchen table, looking over the stack of documents one last time. The weight of it all was starting to feel heavier, but I pushed through it. I had to. There was no other way. The next day, I drove to Spokane. It felt surreal, driving back to the place where everything had started, back to the house that no longer belonged to me. It wasn't home anymore. It was just a house, a place that had been turned into something else by people I thought I could trust. When I arrived, I didn't hesitate. I grabbed the binder and stepped out of the car, my heart pounding in my chest. The house loomed ahead, just as it had the day I first bought it, but this time, I wasn't the same person. I wasn't the person who would stand by and let them take everything. I was taking it back. As I walked up the sidewalk, I could hear the sound of voices inside, laughter. The clinking of glasses. They were celebrating, and I was about to crash their party. I knocked once, but no one answered. I pushed the door open. It creaked on its hinges, the sound cutting through the noise inside. When I stepped into the living room, there they were, Dad, standing by the tree, and Ivy, grinning like she had just won a prize. Their faces froze the moment they saw me. "You're too late, kid," Ivy said, her voice dripping with smugness. "We already closed the deal." I didn't respond right away, I just let the silence stretch out. Then I pulled out the binder, opened it to the first page, and turned the screen toward them. "The house you sold is actually still mine," I said, calm and steady. Ivy's smile faltered, and Dad's face went pale. They didn't know what to say, didn't know how to react. Their perfect little plan was falling apart in front of them. "What the hell are you talking about?" Dad demanded. I didn't waste time explaining. I had everything I needed. The signed documents, the emails, the proof. I handed them the binder. "You thought you could get away with it," I said. "But you didn't count on me finding out." I watched as they flipped through the pages, their faces changing as they saw the evidence. There was no denying it now. They had crossed a line, and I was about to make them face the consequences. I didn't need to say anything more. I knew that I had won, that this was just the beginning. They had stolen my house, my trust, and my peace of mind, but I was taking it all back. The days that followed the confrontation were a blur of legal paperwork, meetings with lawyers, and the cold, sharp reality of everything I had to do. The house, once a place of warmth and memories, was now a distant, painful reminder of what my family had taken from me. But I couldn't dwell on that. I had a plan, and I was sticking to it, no matter how hard it was. I spent countless hours reviewing documents with my attorney, sorting through contracts, emails, and every transaction my father had made without my knowledge. The weight of it all was crushing, but I couldn't afford to let it break me. I had to be stronger than that. Princess was there every step of the way, guiding me through the maze of legalese and helping me piece together the truth. The evidence was undeniable. My father's betrayal was clear, and my sister's complicity was equally damning. But the hardest part wasn't the documents or the case. It was what came next. It was the phone calls. The ones where I heard my father's voice crack as he begged me to forgive him, to let him explain. The ones where Ivy cried and tried to turn the situation around, claiming she didn't know what had happened, but I didn't buy it. They both knew exactly what they were doing, and they had used me as nothing more than a pawn in their game. I ignored their calls, their messages, their pleas. I couldn't bring myself to listen to their excuses anymore. The more they begged, the more I realized how deep their manipulation ran, and the more determined I became to make them face the consequences. I filed the lawsuit. Fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, and violation of real estate laws. The case was straightforward, but the emotional toll it took on me was anything but. I had to relive the betrayal every time I sat down with my lawyer, every time I looked at the evidence, every time I saw my father's name on a piece of paper. But in a strange way, the pain became easier to bear. The more I stood up for myself, the more I realized that I wasn't just fighting for the house. I was fighting for my peace, for my future, for the life I deserved. And as much as it hurt, I knew I had to keep going. It wasn't long before the consequences started to catch up with my father and Ivy. The court documents, the public records, they were all there for anyone to see, and soon the story spread. My father's reputation, built over decades, began to crumble. Ivy's influencer persona, which had always been built on lies, shattered along with it. She tried to salvage her image, posting vague apologies online, but it was too late. Her followers were gone, and the brands that once worked with her quickly distanced themselves. She couldn't escape the consequences of what she had done, no matter how hard she tried. My father, meanwhile, tried to make amends in his own way. He sold off everything he had left, the rental properties, the cars, the tools he loved so much, but none of it mattered. The damage had been done. His financial ruin was inevitable, and with it, the collapse of everything he had built. I watched it all unfold from the sidelines, detached, unemotional. I had nothing left to give them. They had taken it all. But as the days passed, I started to feel something shift inside me. I had fought for what was mine, and in doing so, I had regained something even more valuable: control over my life. For the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for someone to take care of me. I wasn't waiting for someone to fix what had been broken. I was doing it myself. The day I closed the deal on the house felt like a quiet victory. The buyers, a young Navy couple, seemed eager to settle into their new home, and I couldn't help but feel a sense of peace as I handed them the keys. It wasn't about the money, it was about letting go. Letting go of the anger, the pain, and the weight of my family's betrayal. I moved into a new apartment, a small one-bedroom overlooking the lake. It wasn't much, but it was mine. I could already feel the freedom settling in, a sense of lightness I hadn't felt in years. The apartment wasn't a home, it was just a place to sleep. But it was a start, and as I stood there, looking out over the water, I realized something. For the first time in my life, I was exactly where I needed to be. I was free. Free from the manipulation, free from the lies, free from everything that had tried to hold me back. Princess came to visit a few days later. She had just wrapped up a conference and dropped by to check in. We sat on my tiny balcony, sipping whiskey and watching the last of the snow melt into the lake. "It's done, huh?" she said quietly. "Yeah," I replied, a small smile tugging at my lips. It's done. I didn't need to say anything else. We both knew what it meant. It meant that I had taken my life back, and nothing would ever be the same. The house sat empty when I went back to collect the last of my things. The movers had come and gone, leaving only dust and remnants of memories behind. The Christmas tree I had once put up with pride, decorating every branch with care, had long since been taken down, the ornaments packed away in boxes. The place felt so cold now, no warmth, no sound, no life. Just a shell of what it used to be. I stood in the doorway for a moment, letting the silence settle around me. The house that had once been my anchor was gone, but there was no sadness in me. Not anymore, it was just a building, and I was finally free. I walked through the room slowly, taking in the emptiness. The living room where Ivy and I had argued over small things, the kitchen where Dad and I had spent hours cooking, laughing, and telling stories. It all seemed so distant now, like a life I had left behind, and in some ways I had. When I reached the upstairs hallway, I paused in front of Mom's curio cabinet. I had always admired it, the way the wood gleamed under the soft light, the delicate glass doors protecting the keepsakes inside. I hadn't realized it at the time, but it had always been the one thing in this house that felt like it truly belonged. I opened the cabinet and took out the small cedar box that held her wedding ring, the framed photo of our family at my chief pinning ceremony, and the auxiliary pin she wore every Coast Guard birthday. I held them for a moment, feeling the weight of them in my hands. These were the things I would keep. The things that mattered. The rest, everything else, could stay behind. I slipped the items into a padded pouch and closed the cabinet doors for the last time. It was time to let go. As I walked out of the house, the memories didn't follow me. They stayed inside, locked in the rooms I had once called my own. I didn't look back as I closed the door behind me. The house was just a place. It wasn't home anymore. Not for me. By the time I reached my new apartment, I was exhausted but oddly peaceful. The one-bedroom apartment wasn't much, but it was mine. And for the first time in years, I felt like I was where I was supposed to be. No more expectations, no more obligations, no more lies. Princess called me the next morning, just to check in. She'd been there every step of the way, helping me pick up the pieces of my shattered trust and rebuild something stronger. You good? She asked. I smiled as I looked out the window at the lake. Yeah, I'm good. Good, she said, her voice full of that quiet pride she always had when I made it through something tough. You did what you needed to do. I did, I agreed, my gaze still on the water. And it feels strange, but in a good way. There was a pause before she spoke again. You know you've got family, right? Real family. People who choose you, not the ones who use you. I nodded even though she couldn't see me. I know, and I'm not looking back. The line went quiet for a moment before she laughed softly. Hell yeah, you're not. You're not the same person you were when you walked in there. No, I said. I'm not. And I wasn't. I had walked into that house full of hope, full of the idea that family meant everything, that no matter how hard things got, we were supposed to have each other's backs. But I had learned the hard way that family doesn't just mean blood. Family means loyalty, it means respect, it means trust. And once those things are broken, there's nothing left. I hadn't expected it to end like this. I hadn't expected the people I loved to betray me so completely. But in the end, their betrayal had set me free. It had shown me what I was really capable of, what I was willing to do to protect myself, to protect my peace. And now, for the first time in a long time, I had that peace. I looked down at the box in my lap, the one holding the things I had kept from the house. It was small, too small for everything I had left behind. But it was enough. Enough to remind me of who I was, of the person I had fought so hard to become. And as I stood at the window, watching the sunlight filter across the lake, I realized something. For the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting for anyone to come and fix things. I wasn't waiting for my family to come back. I was doing it on my own. I had a life to live, and I was finally free to live it,